At 26 years old, I packed up everything I owned and moved 1,700 miles away to a state I had never lived in. There was no guarantee it would work out, no guarantee I'd feel at home, just a decision that something had to change. And honestly, it was the best decision I'd ever made. But it wasn't easy getting there. So if you've been following along, in the last couple videos, I've talked about feeling stuck in life and the systems I've been using to actually start making progress. But there's a chapter of my story I haven't really gone deep on yet. And I think it's probably the most important one. Because before any of the goals, before any of the mindset shifts, before any of this, there was a decision. A really uncomfortable one. And that decision was leaving New York. So today, I want to talk about that, why we left, what it was actually like, and honestly, whether it was worth it. So I grew up on Long Island pretty much my whole life. I went to elementary school there, high school, college, all of it in New York. And look, New York is genuinely one of a kind. The culture, the energy, the food, there's really nothing like it, at least not that I've experienced so far in my life. And I was never a huge city person, but I do think everyone needs to experience New York City at least once in their life. Growing up, I had everything I needed right there. I have close friends I'd known forever, my family nearby, and I even met my wife in the same town I grew up in. I remember playing handball with my friends, basketball, hanging out outside, walking to 7-Eleven, just that classic kid life. I guess you could say the good old days. But then you graduate college, you start your career, and suddenly you realize, okay, it's time to actually be an adult. And that's when reality starts hitting you. Me and my wife moved in together, first with my mom for a couple years, then eventually into our own apartment. And that's when I had my first real financial epiphany. Rent is expensive, especially in New York. And I'm not saying that as someone who doesn't make money, because I do make a 6-figure salary. And even with that, I knew something was off. Because here's what really got me. My goal growing up was always to own a house one day. That was the dream. So I started doing some research, and I quickly realized that dream looked almost impossible in New York. Decent houses on Long Island are running at least $600,000. And with interest rates where they are, you're looking at a mortgage of maybe $5,000 a month. And like I said, you're getting a decent home. So you may need to do renovations. You may need to make upgrades. So you're going to need even more money than you think. And I remember sitting there thinking, is this really it? Is this actually what we're working towards? Because I love New York. I love my family. I love my friends. But for the first time, I asked myself, is it worth limiting ourselves just to stay? And honestly, I pushed that thought aside for a while because the idea of leaving was terrifying. My mom and I are really close. We saw each other almost daily. My friends are basically my brothers. I know every shortcut. I know all the parkways. I know where to eat, where to go, how everything works. And there's really a comfort in knowing your environment completely. Leaving that felt like giving up something I couldn't get back. So me and my wife renewed our lease for another year. We tried to make it work. I got more intentional about spending, started trying to attack our debt, but the rent kept consuming everything. And at the end of that year, we were right back at the same crossroads. Leave New York or stay. And that's when something shifted. A family friend, someone who grew up in the same town as us his whole life, had actually moved to Texas a couple years before. And he kept telling my mom she should come down. He's actually her friend that she grew up with. So he was always trying to convince her to move down to Texas. He was always telling us how Texas had a different feel to it, a different energy, that it had more of a relaxing, laid back way of life here. And that sounded great to me because that's the kind of person I am. I feel if you asked anyone, like my wife, how she would describe me, I'm sure she would say a laid back person. Now, our family friend, he would tell us how he regretted not making the decision to move down to Texas earlier in his life. And that kind of made me reflect a bit because I know I didn't want to be in the position of regretting not making a decision earlier on. Then one day he sent us a picture of his house, and it is a beautiful home. And he told us the house is $300,000. And I could not believe it because I know in New York, the house would have at minimum been $650,000. And something about seeing, or I guess hearing that number made it feel real. Like, okay, this is actually possible in another state. So from that point, Texas started getting more serious. I dove into research mode. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and did a lot of Google searches about different neighborhoods, the safety, growth, school districts, and suburban feel. And my wife didn't take it seriously at first, but honestly, neither did I, because I never imagined myself leaving New York. But I knew if we were going to do this, I needed to make sure we were making the right call. So we did something that I think is really important before making any major decisions like this. We went to see it in person. So we took a trip down to Texas, me, my wife, my mom, and my sister. And at that point, we were cutting it close, honestly. We had about 2 months before we had to decide whether to renew our lease or not. At that time, we had already decided to put in applications at apartments in Texas just in case, so we can keep our options open. And when we saw the first apartments in person, none of us could believe it. I remember us looking at each other because for half the price, we were getting so much more square footage and space. After the weekend, we flew back to New York and gave ourselves a week to process everything. At the end of that week, I asked my wife what she thought, and she said she couldn't choose. She trusted my judgment and left the decision up to me. So I made the call. We're moving to Texas. Once that decision was made, we set everything in motion. We started packing, we told our jobs, and rented a U-Haul. And man, I did not know how expensive U-Hauls are, but other than that, we did have an emotional going away party with friends and family, which genuinely hurt my heart because knowing I wouldn't be seeing these people as often, that was probably the hardest part of it all. It was a great send-off. We all had a lot of fun. There was a lot of tears, but it left my heart warm knowing how many people cared for us and supported us. The day of the move finally came. We had help from my mom, stepfather, sister, my sister's boyfriend, and my wife's cousin. Honestly, without them, I don't know how we would have done it. Me and my wife talk about that all the time because of how tough that move was. We had 2 cars, my car and my wife's car, and the U-Haul truck. I drove my car, my wife drove hers, and my mom and stepfather took the truck. I was lucky enough to have the 3 cats with me, Floof, Zeus, and Othello, and we drove straight through from New York to Texas. It was more than 30 hours total, probably around that 32 to 34 hour mark for the full ride. And somewhere in there, we had about a 1 to 2 hour nap, but we were just trying to make it through, mainly because my wife had to go back to work on that following Monday. And we started driving Friday night with the plans of making it there by Sunday morning, unloading the truck, and then being ready for the week. But one thing's for sure, I'll never be doing that again. Finally, we pulled up to our new apartment on that Sunday morning, and I remember stepping outside and thinking, man, it's hot. It was mid-90s at least. Felt worse because it was super humid, and it's late September. And in New York, late September usually means maybe high 70s, maybe on a hot day it would be low 80s, but I wasn't prepared. We made our way into the apartment to finally relax a little after that long drive as we waited for my mom and stepdad to arrive with the U-Haul truck before we start unloading. And I just remember it being so hot. So first thing I did when I got in there was turn the central AC down as low as it can go. And some time passed and still felt just as hot. And I took a look at the thermostat and realized the temperature was not dropping. Then it hit us that the central AC was not working in our apartment. And as I mentioned, it was a Sunday, the leasing office was closed, and we were burning up in there. After some digging, we realized that in Texas, a broken AC is actually considered a maintenance emergency. So we ended up finding the maintenance line, and they eventually came. But not before we had finally started unloading the entire truck and hauled everything up 2 flights of stairs in that heat. Also, just a side note, the girls decided to go to Lowe's for home supplies while we unloaded. Very helpful timing. But eventually the AC was fixed. Everything was inside and we finally had cold air. Everyone stayed an extra day and then the final goodbyes came. And when that front door closed, it was just me, my wife, and our 3 cats. My wife did take it pretty hard, but we started adjusting, slowly filling up the apartment, building our routines, and making it feel like home. Now, I do have to be completely transparent about something here, because I think it's important. I made a decision that I do not recommend. I moved to Texas without a job lined up. I gambled on being able to find something quickly, and on top of that, I had procrastinated on not getting my Texas pharmacy license. So I wasn't even legally able to work as a pharmacist in Texas right away. I had to study for it and pass the Texas law exam first. Fortunately, I did pass on my first attempt, but for about 3 months after we moved, I wasn't working. My wife kept her remote job from New York, which helped, and I had savings that carried us through. But it was stressful, and I was lucky. So please, if you're considering a move like this, have a job lined up first. Do not do what I did. It's pretty stupid, but worked out. Eventually, I did land a position I genuinely couldn't believe I'd get. So I am now a work from home pharmacist, which I'm super happy about and didn't even know existed before this. And eventually, everything started feeling normal again. Once life settled down, I started noticing all the differences between New York and Texas, and some of them took real adjusting to. The politeness thing was immediately noticeable. In New York, you walk past people without even making eye contact most of the time. Here, neighbors actually say hello. Getting called sir felt strange at first. Did make me feel old. My wife definitely didn't take kindly to being called madam. She freaked out afterwards, and I had to reassure her that she's still young. But honestly, I got used to it. The lack of sidewalks was a culture shock as well. In New York, you can walk almost anywhere. Here, I literally can't walk to the nearest park. It's very car dependent, which honestly I don't mind, but it was an adjustment. The pace is completely different too. Everything is slower here, and I mean that in the best possible way. You just sit somewhere and relax. The one thing I noticed that is not slower are the drivers though. I did not know how crazy Texas drivers are until I came down here. I used to think New Yorkers did not know how to drive, but man, they're giving them a run for their money down here. I'd say it's at least tight, if not a little worse down here. Now, what I genuinely miss about New York, and I'll be honest because pretending I missed nothing would be fake. For one, I do miss the food, specifically being able to go to a nearby deli and get something like a bacon, egg, and cheese on an egg bagel, which I love. And whenever I go back to New York, I still get. And being able to get a quick coffee on the go. Here, it's not really a thing, which I didn't know until I moved down here. I honestly thought delis were everywhere, so that one did hurt. Now, the weather has been the biggest adjustment, honestly. You can wear shorts basically year-round, which I love. I'm all for shorts. I am not a jean person. But June through August is genuinely brutal. It's scorching hot and humid in a way that keeps you inside. So during those summer months, you'll know where to find me. I'll be inside with the AC cranked down low. And the funny thing about Texas weather, our first year here actually, it snowed maybe half an inch, probably less to be honest. It was one day in January, and I was so shocked when I heard that schools were closed for days. Restaurants were shutting down early, and the grocery stores were cleared out, and the snow melted the same day. In New York, that would have been a regular December day. I remember actually going to work in a blizzard, and customers were showing up somehow. So it was an adjustment in a different direction. But shoveling snow is something I absolutely do not miss. And I can't talk about Texas without talking about H-E-B. If you're not from Texas, H-E-B is a grocery store that Texans are genuinely proud of, and rightfully so. It has everything. My wife and I always rave about it to our friends and family in New York, and even when they've come down, we have taken them to H-E-B to check it out. But the biggest change, the one that actually changed the trajectory of our lives, was the financial breathing room Texas gave us. Cutting our rent almost in half for significantly more space, that changed everything. And here's something I didn't fully expect. My salary in Texas was technically slightly less than what I was making in New York, but Texas has no state income tax. Just that difference alone made my actual take-home pay equal to or slightly more than what I was bringing home in New York. Adding the fact that I was working from home now and saving on gas and commuting. And financially, we ended up in a meaningfully better position, despite the salary difference. And that breathing room is what allowed us to actually start attacking our debt seriously and start building something. I remember all those restless nights in New York, lying awake thinking about how to do better. Looking at where we are now compared to where we were, the progress is real, and it all started with this move. So the real question is, was it worth it? I would say yes, without question. Do I miss my friends and family? Of course, every day. That part never fully goes away. But we do stay in touch constantly. Almost daily, I talk with my friends and my mom and family. And most of them have even come to visit multiple times. And me and my wife still go back to New York, so we never really feel disconnected. And what I've come to realize is that the people who matter stay in your life regardless of distance. So what this move gave me was something I didn't know I needed. A reset. Not because my life was broken, but because staying comfortable was keeping me from growing. This move forced me to prove to myself that I could handle discomfort, that I could make a hard decision and follow through on it. And that proof has carried over into everything else I've been building since. The debt payoff, the goals, the discipline, even starting this channel, because once you do one hard thing successfully, the next hard thing feels a little less impossible. Now, I don't think the move itself changed my life, but I think it created the space for me to change it myself. And sometimes that's all you need. A change of environment, a change of pace, a reason to start over. Everyone's situation is different, but if you're torn on a decision like this, first, make sure you have a job lined up, have savings, make sure you and your partner are aligned, and maybe consider renting before buying in case it doesn't work out, because that's what I did. But most importantly, trust yourself, because the answer is never completely clear, and you'll never know without trying. One of the biggest factors in my decision was not wanting to live with regret. I'm still in my 20s, I have no kids yet, so this was my window to take a risk. And what is life without a little risk and a sense of adventure? If any of this resonated, whether you're considering a big move or just feeling stuck where you are, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But that's all from me for now. Peace out.